probably brushed your teeth this morning without thinking about it for even a second. It's one of the most automatic habits a human being has, right up there with breathing and blinking. But the modern toothbrush sitting in your bathroom cup traces directly back to a prison cell built by a convicted rioter using a leftover dinner bone and bristles smuggled from a guard decades before anyone had ever heard the word hygiene used the way we use it today. This is the history of the toothbrush. Humans have been cleaning their teeth in some fashion for thousands of years, long before anything resembling a modern brush existed. Archaeologists have found chew sticks buried alongside ancient Babylonians, dating back to roughly 3500 BC. Frayed twigs, chewed at one end until the fibers softened into a rough brush shape. The ancient Egyptians used something remarkably similar, and some tombs have even yielded early versions of a toothpaste-like paste, made from grown pumice, ash, and eggshell, meant to be rubbed on with a stick or a finger. Similar chewing sticks show up independently across India and Africa as well, and in many parts of the world, people still use a version of this today, most notably the miswak, a twig taken from the Salvadora persica tree, used for oral hygiene across the Islamic world for well over 1,000 years, and still recommended by some dentists today for its natural antibacterial properties. The design took a genuine leap forward in China. Buddhist monks during the Tang Dynasty, more than 1,000 years ago, were already documented cleaning their teeth with brushes made from horsetail hair fixed onto a handle carved from bone. By 1498, Emperor Hongji of the Ming Dynasty is credited with refining this into something far closer to a proper toothbrush, using stiff boar bristles from the back of a pig's neck, chosen specifically because cold climate hogs grew firmer, more durable hair set into a handle made of bone or bamboo. European travelers making contact with Asia through expanding trade routes eventually encountered the design themselves and carried the idea slowly back toward the West over the following centuries, though it would take generations before it caught on in any serious way. In England, though, oral hygiene had stayed remarkably primitive well into the 1700s. The standard method involved rubbing a rag across your teeth, coated in a mixture of soot and salt, a technique that did very little besides make your mouth taste like a fireplace and leave your gums raw. Some wealthier households used a chewed twig, similar to older global traditions, but there was no mass-produced, purpose-built device for cleaning teeth anywhere in the country. This was the state of English dental hygiene in 1770, the year a man named William Addis found himself locked inside London's notorious Newgate Prison, convicted of inciting a riot in the Spitalfields district, a part of London known at the time for unrest among its working-class weavers. Prison gave Addis an unusual amount of time to think, sitting alone in a cold stone cell with nothing to occupy his hands. According to the story passed down through his own family for generations, he noticed a guard sweeping the floor of his cell block with an ordinary bristle broom, and the shape of it stuck stubbornly in his mind. If bundled bristles could scrub a stone floor clean, he reasoned, a smaller, more carefully refined version could surely do a far better job on human teeth than a soot-covered rag ever could. He saved a small bone left over from one of his prison meals, likely from a piece of meat served at dinner, and carefully drilled a series of small holes into it by hand, using whatever crude tools he could get access to inside the prison walls. He then convinced one of the prison guards to supply him with a stash of stiff boar bristles, likely in exchange for money or some other favor. Working entirely inside his cell, Addis tied the bristles into small, tight tufts, threaded them one by one through the holes he drilled into the bone, and sealed each tuft firmly in place with a dab of glue. It was crude. It was entirely handmade in a locked prison cell, using nothing but scavenged materials and patience. But it worked far better than anything else available anywhere in England at the time. If you're enjoying stories like this, hit subscribe now. This channel digs up hidden histories exactly like this one every single week. By 1780, Addis had been released, and he wasted no time turning his prison invention into an actual business, setting up shop and beginning small-scale production almost immediately. He began manufacturing bone and bristle toothbrushes by hand and selling them across London, first quietly, then to growing demand. The timing worked strongly in his favor. Refined sugar, newly imported in growing quantities from the West Indies, was rotting British teeth at an alarming rate across every social class, and demand for any genuine solution to tooth decay was climbing fast, with dentists of the era desperate for something to recommend beyond rags and salt. Addis's brushes sold well enough that his small operation grew steadily into a genuinely prosperous company. By 1840, the business, still entirely family-run, employed 60 workers and offered 4 distinct models: gents, ladies, child's, and a smaller version called Tom Thumb, each shaped and sized for a different customer. William Addis died in 1808, a wealthy man by any standard of his era, having transformed a prison punishment into genuine lasting fortune, and he left the entire operation to his eldest son, who was also named William, continuing a pattern of inherited leadership. The company remained in the Addis family for an extraordinary 216 years, passed down carefully across 10 consecutive generations, before finally being sold to its own management team in 1996, closing out one of the longest family-run manufacturing dynasties in British history. The business kept growing well beyond its founder's lifetime, and it stayed remarkably tied to major moments in British history, almost as though the company's fate was permanently linked to the nation's own. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Addis supplied British troops with toothbrushes as standard kit, packed alongside razors and soap in a soldier's basic supplies. Historians credit this wartime distribution with helping to establish regular toothbrushing as a genuine national habit across England for the first time, rather than a habit reserved mostly for the wealthy or the health-conscious. Millions of working-class men who had never owned a dedicated toothbrush before the war returned home afterward with the habit firmly established. By the time the Second World War arrived 2 decades later, the company was manufacturing at a genuinely massive industrial scale, supplying an astonishing 1 million toothbrushes to British armed forces in 1939 alone, and employing roughly 650 workers by that point, a staggering expansion from the single prison cell where the entire idea had begun. Material science eventually caught up with the original design too, more than a century and a half after Addis first drilled into that bone and boar bristle, while a genuine improvement over rags and soot still had real limitations that no amount of refinement could fully solve. Bristles fell out unevenly with regular use. Bone handles could crack or splinter under pressure. And boar bristle, being a natural animal fiber, retained bacteria and moisture in ways that weren't especially sanitary, no matter how carefully it was cleaned. In 1938, the American chemical company DuPont unveiled a new synthetic material called nylon and quickly built it into a product called Dr. West's Miracle Toothbrush, the first toothbrush ever made using nylon bristles instead of natural animal hair. Addis's own company followed close behind, launching its first nylon toothbrush under the Wisdom brand in 1940. And by 1947, the very last bone-handled toothbrushes ever produced by the original company finally rolled off the production line for good, closing out a manufacturing tradition that stretched directly back to Addis's original prison cell design, unbroken for well over 150 years. The toothbrush's basic mechanical concept, a handle and a cluster of bristles set at one end, has remained essentially unchanged for well over 2 centuries since Addis first drilled holes into that leftover bone. Electric and battery-powered versions have added motors, timers, and rotating heads, and modern plastics have replaced bone entirely, cheaper to mold and far more hygienic than any natural material could ever be. But the fundamental idea sitting in your bathroom cup this morning is, in every meaningful sense, still William Addis's design, barely altered in its basic structure. In more than one public survey conducted in recent decades, people asked to name the single, everyday invention they genuinely could not imagine living without, have ranked the humble toothbrush above the automobile, the television, and the microwave combined, an object so deeply embedded in daily life that most people spend less than a second thinking about it before using it twice a day, every single day, for their entire lives. So, the next time you reach for your toothbrush, without a second thought, remember exactly where that simple design actually came from. Not a laboratory, not a dental college, a locked cell inside one of London's most notorious prisons, a guard's broom, a leftover dinner bone, and a convicted rioter with nothing but time on his hands, and a genuinely good idea. If this surprised you, subscribe for more hidden histories behind the everyday objects you never think twice about. Next time, we're uncovering the toy one government actually tried to ban.